Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Friday night in this cold weather. I guess one of the things that helps me to survive this cold weather is to think of summer. So, I don't see the screen. So why don't we skip this presentation and talk about summer vacation plans? If you have the chance to travel to anywhere in the world, where would you go? Think of your dream summer vacation. I like traveling, and I guess once I start planning a travel, I think about the museums and the exhibitions in the city I'm visiting. So probably the reason is that I'm very much interested in the idea of traveling through space and time. A few years ago, I visited the Maparium in Boston. It's a 3-story globe that represents the world map in 1935. And it has been described as the only place in which you can sit or stand in the middle of the world and look into the past. So the idea behind the Maparium was to design a visually immersive environment in which the visitors can be immersed in 360 degrees visually. But this design surprisingly came with unique acoustics that turned the space into a whispering gallery. How many of you have heard of whispering galleries before? Okay, few of you. So, interestingly, instead of, if I'm talking to you now and I'm walking toward you, and instead of my sound getting quieter, instead of getting louder, it gets quieter. And if I'm walking far from you, it gets louder. So the reflective glass surfaces of this Maparium acts as sound reflectors and creates this impressive acoustic environment. So if I'm standing in the middle between these two people and they are whispering to each other, I might not be able to hear what they are saying, but they will be able to hear each other clearly. Another impressive effect is that when you are standing in the middle and then people are talking, you feel that you are fully immersed and surrounded by sound. So as much as I enjoyed this experience, there was a question in my mind. As a researcher, I want to recreate this experience to analyze it. So since curved surfaces that create similar effects exist in, or it's a dominant architectural element in many worship spaces, I was interested in studying and analyzing how such surfaces form the acoustic environment in worship spaces. So in order to do that, I will have to ask some of you to join me to a visit to the first building, and then I can ask you some questions about your sound perception of this building, whether you like the sound, whether you noticed some reverberation, and then I will have to ask you again to go with me to the second building, third building, and then fourth building, and ask you the same questions. This is not practical, even if the buildings are in the same city, let alone if they are in different continents. And another thing is that once you move to the second building, you will only remember just a little about the acoustic experience of the first building you visited. And even if you remembered, just because these experiences happened in different days, probably even different months, there are some external factors that are impossible to control. What if I was in a bad mood on that day? What if I was sick, for example? So I might rate the subjective experience differently. So this leaves us with probably the only solution is to create an experience that allows to travel through space and time. And this is what VR does. So to explore this possibility, I traveled last summer to Maryland to visit the Diyanet Center of America. And I was excited that I was not only able to recreate 360 visuals of this beautiful mosque, but I was also able to capture 360 acoustic experience that can be experienced through headsets such as the Oculus. And I have demos to show you later. So this is how the space looked, and this is how it sounded. And to explain how the architecture shapes the acoustics, I wanted also to play the dry recording that I played in the mosque and then recorded. So the first step is that this sound was recorded not in an audio studio, but in an echoic chamber, which means that it was recorded without any reflections. And then this was the original recording.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك.
To notice the difference, I'll play the audio that was recorded in the mosque again. There was no artificial reverberation. All these reflections were a result of the architectural surfaces. So I would like to take you with me through the journey I went through with all its surprises that led me to choose the topic of this talk. And then I'll hand you some of the treasures I found on my way. We will discuss how or what are the possibilities of using VR in research and in the professional field. And then at the end, I'll leave some time for any of you who would like to try some of the equipment or have any question about them. So, why did I choose this topic? Why one against the other? So let's go back a little bit in time. I have been working in the field of architectural acoustics since my master's degree. And when I joined the University of Michigan in the PhD program in architecture, I was excited to take some classes at the School of Music. I was also interested in taking some workshops to get access to the audio studio because part of my previous work was designing sound diffusers such as this one, which allows to fix the acoustic experience or the acoustics of the audio studio. So I was not thinking about using the audio studio as a place for recording or mixing sound, but instead I was thinking about it as a listening room in which I can have some subjective evaluation, or as an exploratory lab in which I can modify the wall surfaces and then see how this affects the acoustics of the audio studio. So both experiences opened my eyes to something interesting. Most of what I learned in the classes, in the performing arts and technology classes, which I consider among the most interesting and the best classes I've taken, are exactly the opposite of what I learned in architectural acoustics. And I'll explain why, but before that, I would like to get an idea of how many of the audience are in the PAD field, either students, alumni, faculty. Okay, architecture, 4, 5. Okay, so this is going to get interesting. So the difference that I felt was that as an architect, I'm always thinking about how I can design a space that creates a certain experience. While part of sound engineers' work is how to create an acoustic experience that probably represents something or represent an acoustic experience in an original space. To explain this more, we will hear the acoustics of Hagia Sophia in Turkey. Stunning acoustics. So this acoustics is a result of a combination of three aspects: the volume, geometry, and the materials of the interior surfaces of this building. So as an architect, I'm always thinking about what is the perfect combination that can allow me to recreate such experience. But I have a surprise for you. The audio you just listened to was not recorded in Hagia Sophia. It was actually created through oralization, which is researchers went to Hagia Sophia, they captured the sound signature of the space, and through signal processing technique, they created this convolution, which represent the oralization of the space. So, for a period of time, there was a conflict in my mind. If technology can allow us to recreate such interesting experience, why should we put all this effort in architecture? Why don't we give architects the freedom of design and ignore acoustics and then ask the help from our friends, sound engineers, to allow us to get any sound experience that we want? In this scenario, I was thinking, why should we create a problem? So this is the opposite side. Why should we create a problem, then try to solve it? Why don't we start with good acoustics and then use sound system to enhance it? And this came to my mind through attending an Acoustical Society of America meeting in which a researcher suggested a whole session just to discuss this topic. And the name of the session was Even Better Than the Real Thing, which means good architecture with good acoustics and then use sound system to make it even better. So I discovered that it doesn't have to be one way or the other. It can be both. Because there are many applications that the researchers in architectural acoustics, they can use the technology created by sound engineers to analyze the acoustic experience, and then some of their work can also contribute to the developing the technology that sound engineers can also use to develop more tools. So, for example, since Hagia Sophia has been turned into a museum, it's impossible for any of us to have this acoustic experience in the actual space. But with this technology that sound engineers are developing, we can now create, or we can travel through space and also time in which Hagia Sophia was a worship space, and then we can listen to such audio. And this is exactly what a researcher in architectural acoustics needs. I'll give you two more examples or applications. So the first one is binaural audio. So binaural audio, one of the applications of using binaural audio is to have the binaural head. I don't have a name for this binaural head yet. I don't know if it's a he or she. If you have suggestions for the name, please tell me later. So the binaural head has two microphones inserted in each ear, and then this allows to capture the sound depending on the direction that it comes from. So I have a live demo here, and I would like to ask a volunteer to try it. Maybe somebody who never tried binaural recording, or anyone? Yeah, thank you. Yes. So I will suggest that you talk to yourself, so it will be a weird feeling. So you can talk and see how you can listen to your sound. Can you go closer? So do you hear the sound coming from a specific direction? Or do you hear it's like in someone is talking to you directly? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll have this here if anyone else would like to try it later. So the binaural head is used in research in architectural acoustics for subjective evaluation of the acoustic experience. And then also it's used for sound production. So as I mentioned, binaural audio, which is considered spatial audio because it gives you a sense of 360 audio, is used as a tool to analyze acoustic experiences. And there's, at the same time, there's research in binaural audio, which deals with the frequency and phase of the sound that comes to each ear, with also considering the shadowing that is created by human heads. And this is called the head-related transfer function. So this research also feeds back to creating better or more accurate binaural audio. So the loop keeps moving. Another example is ambisonic audio. I have a demo here, but before that I should probably explain what an ambisonic audio is. So similar to binaural audio, in which you hear the sound based on the direction that it comes from, the ambisonic system is similar in creating 360 sound. However, you will not have to put the headphones. You can just sit or stand in the center, and then each of the loudspeakers will shoot the sound based on the direction. So you'll be able to distinguish where the sound is coming from. And doesn't this remind you of the Symposium I presented at the beginning? Feels very similar. So this is an area that I'm currently working on. It has some applications in architectural acoustics, but using simulation software. So you can create ambisonic experience by modeling a room and then also capturing the sound signature of it, and then using the ambisonic system to recreate the experience. However, I still think that there is an area for improvement for the ambisonics. And as I mentioned, this is one of the areas I'm working on. I have an audio here, which is probably not going to be clear in terms of the directions for one reason, which is that the speakers which are around this room are very far from each other. So if they were closer and you are in the center, it might be clearer to distinguish the direction in which the sound is coming from. So I'll play the sound.
لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Okay, so this sound was recorded using this ambisonic microphone, which has 4 channels. So each channel, as you can see, golden microphone. So each of these channels will capture the sound based on the direction it comes from. And then, based on that, you direct the audio for each channel to a loudspeaker. It's also used in audio production. So as I mentioned, again, the same idea. The tools that are developed by sound engineers that are used for audio production can be used as tool for research in architectural acoustics, and research in architectural acoustics can allow us to understand how or why do we hear sound reflections in a specific way that affects our perception of being in a space. So I feel that there is a lot of development in the visuals in the VR industry. However, I still feel that the spatial audio is still falling behind. So this is why I was motivated to work in both directions, to use a VR as a tool to analyze acoustic experiences in my research. And I'm also working in developing some methodologies that allow for improving the VR tools to create better and more accurate representation of the real world. So the way I think about it is that there is a huge potential for spatial audio, and some of you might have heard of the 360 spatial audio challenge, which was held here at the University of Michigan a few weeks ago, I guess. And when I attended the workshop presentation, although the aim was to create a 360 spatial audio using Pro Tools, but at the same time I was thinking about the potential of using spatial audio as a research tool to understand or to analyze psychoacoustics and sound localization. And then how can we use the outcome of this research in developing better video games, for example. Another thing that caught my attention while I was participating last month at the MIT Reality Virtually Hackathon is that there is a huge thirst for sound specialists or experts or audio engineer. And here's a capture of our Slack channel. And as you can see, this was during the team formation. So most of the teams are looking for sound engineers. So I'd like to say to the sound engineers, the VR world is yours. So start exploring. I actually started with the Google Cardboard and the headphones. That's how I started my research. And then if you are looking, especially for audio engineers, if you are looking for 360 visuals, here is a treasure. I found this website that has a lot of 360 visuals around the world. So you just zoom in to the city and you get more 360 pictures. I was thinking, what if we can have 360 visuals for buildings around the world? This might change the way we do research in architecture or even teach architecture. And if you don't find what you are looking for, you can always create it. 360 camera. So the main thing I think that is a potential for using VR in research is when your research is dealing with creating an experience that maybe in which you need to travel through space and time. That's how I frame it. So regardless of the topic, I discussed this idea with some of the PhD students from different fields last semester, and I was amazed by the idea they came with in how they can use VR in their research. I would like also to hear from all of you, but before that, I have one more interesting example. So we talked about traveling acoustically or through audio through space and time, and also with the world map and 360 visuals, we talked about traveling through space visually. So how about we travel through time visually now? So you visit an ancient structure, and then you look at the architectural ornaments or the remainings of the architectural ornaments, and then you put the headset, and you are able to see how it looked like back then. And you don't actually have to be in the actual space, because in sometimes the experiences that you are looking at are not from the past, but from the future. So spread your wings, start exploring, and keep this loop moving. Thank you. So I'm thinking now, maybe we can start by taking questions or ideas regarding maybe applying VR in research. And while we are doing that, we can circulate this with the same visuals I showed you here. I will have both the Oculus and the cardboard. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
I have a question. This question is only because you brought it up towards the end, the 360 images of various locations, and you kind of implied some sort of an association between the 360 recording of the sound and the 360 images, and some kind of a pairing, perhaps. That's what you were implying, although I'm not sure. So that kind of raised the question of, in your own research, how much do you really depend on the image or the vision, and which we know that is probably the most biased sensor experience, right? And sometimes it needs to be undermined just to be able to assess the qualities or the potentials of other sensor experiences like sound. So I was wondering how much vision or the ways of seeing actually inform your research. Do you really depend on, while assessing these sensor experiences, do you really depend on recording of a 360 image or a photograph, or even, I don't know, maybe a sketch drawing of the mosque you're visiting? Or is it like, what is, yeah, so maybe you can just contemplate on that.
Thank you, because this is a very interesting question that I get very often. So you are studying acoustics, so why do you need the visuals? So there are a lot of opinions in the research of architectural acoustics regarding whether you can separate the hearing sense from the visual sense, and whether this will give you the exact experience or not. So some of them are with, and some of them are against. And there is another opinion which might, maybe it might upset sound engineers, but it suggests that eliminating the architectural elements that are visual, but at the same time, they are the objects that are creating the acoustic experience, creates a conflict which is unconscious that makes us sometimes uncomfortable. Which means that if I'm sitting in a small room, let's say an audio studio, and I'm listening to a sound which is very reverberant, there is a conflict between what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing. And there is actually a scientific term for that. but this conflict makes us uncomfortable. So that was one of the reasons I was interested in adding the visuals to see whether it will be effective or not. Thank you for the question.